Correct.
And
so now we want to jump the roadmap issues.
Yeah. So and I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about why we're doing this. We've had a lot of people asking us, like, what's on the horizon? What are you working on now? What's coming soon? And what's kind of the long-term vision? I'm glad to finally be able to actually turn my attention to the long-term vision again. We really have been so focused on just getting the game done for the longest time that we haven't talked about this a lot. So we put together a series of slides. I kind of bucketed everything as, short-term things, medium-term things, and long-term things. The short-term things are things that I really would like to have for launch. I don't know that we're going to get all of them. We'll get some of them, but a few of them may not make it. But I'm working as hard as we can, and the team is working as hard as they can to try and get those things done either before launch or immediately after. The next one is kind of the medium term, and those are the things that I'd like to see us turn our attention to as soon as we have our launch legs underneath us. So kind of the first 6 months, 12 months kind of plan would be things in the short term, in the medium term. And then long term is stuff we do definitely want to get to, but it's more like long-term health of the game, long-term directions. I will say, first of all, this is not an exhaustive list. Like, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we intend to do that is impactful and cool, but it didn't rise to the level of making it to this list. And this is also my list, right? There's a whole bunch of technical things that need to be done on the back end related to operations or tools or whatever. I didn't list any of that because that's kind of, again, inside baseball. So, okay, so why don't we just start with the short-term list, and we can go through and explain those things. I'm sure that this will also generate a ton of questions as well. So Emily, can you bring up the first slide, which is the short-term things? Okay, so the first thing that we're all really, really focused on, you guys know, and it's always the top of the list, is optimization. We're continuing to work on that. We've seen some pretty significant improvements, both on the client and the server. We had a great siege last week that was really busy and actually quite playable, though there were moments where the frame rate still dipped down. So we're definitely working on all that right now. Part of the problem with the gap in the castle walls that I mentioned is we're doing a massive optimization right now to castle walls internally. And to go back and fix that problem meant basically undoing all of that work, which would to be able to fix the problem, at which point we throw that fix away. And then when we come right back, redo all that work is now delayed. So I decided that I thought it was more important to continue pushing on the optimization, even if it means suffering through a small 4 or 5 day campaign that has weird and wonky walls. So hopefully you guys can see the wisdom in that. So optimization, I would say, is kind of number one on the list. Factories is another one that I put very, very high on the list. We're actually working on that in the background right now. So I've got some hopes for it that I didn't have previously because I realized that the priority is really, really up there. So we'll see where that falls, but we are working on it. It's not something we've forgotten. I think it's kind of a critical part to making the entire harvesting, crafting economy loop work. Tournament arena. So this is one that we actually haven't talked about in a long time. We haven't talked about really since Kickstarter. We had a Kickstarter goal for a tournament system, and we're going to spend a fair chunk of the time in this Q&A talking about this one. So I'll kind of punt this one to the latter half of the Q&A, but it's something that I feel like is pretty important, and we'll go through the reasons why I think it's important and how we're tackling it as well. And I've got guest star Ray Shelley here to come in since he's been kind of helping drive on this as well. Increased storage. This is a quality of life thing that we know you guys have needed for a while. We have public chests coming for the EKs in this next version. And we have more that we need, right? We need vassal chests. We need all sorts of chests. It's a list of kind of checkboxes of all the different checkboxes for each of the different permission types. And we are checking those off one by one. On the discipline front, we've got a round of balancing and curating that needs to come. So we're working on that. On the harvesting and crafting side, we put in kind of a shim for, when we took out passive training, we needed something in its place. So we put in a system that basically leveraged crafting to be our advancement system. I still don't like that. So we're taking a hard look at trying to move to the more long-term solution that we want, which is more similar to vessels, the vessel advancement system. It's just that requires some engineering help. We can't, the crafting solution was nice because we could do it all in design. Like we didn't have to go back to engineers. The longer term solution is going to require some engineering support. So it's on my list of things we're trying to get to. And then soul binding is actually just a thing that I mentioned because it's a part of that. Is one of the things that is common in other games is equipment that once I use it, it's now locked to either my character or my account, and other people can't use it. That's something we don't have support for right now, but it could be a part of that advancement mechanism. So I've got that on the list as something we're looking at. I will say that design still a little bit in flux.
Yeah, can I? Because I really want to reassure, because I know everyone's going to freak out about that, which is that's only for disciplines, and it's mainly because Todd and I don't like the fact that you basically sacrifice a discipline when you equip it, and then to upgrade it, you're actually in the hole because you can't use that one. So this is a discipline only thing that we're talking about, and it's mainly because right now you to unequip a discipline, you destroy it. And we actually want you to be able to use those ones again, or maybe even upgrade them, but we don't want the economy messed up by people just being able to unequip it like regular equipment.
And if they do unequip it, we're also discussing there's one advantage of that, which is that you could then we could allow you to use that on a different character, so that you don't have to go through if you just have decided I want to move from this character to this one, it gives you some ability to transfer that without having to start over every time. So anyway, this one is still being debated. But I wanted to bring it up because it is on my hot list of things that I'm nervous about not having an answer for launch. So I wanted to let you guys know that we recognize that there's a problem. It's a problem spot, and that we are putting a lot of focus and attention. So that's why it's listed under disciplines. You'll notice on the screen. So next one, Handshake system for sieges. For those of you who aren't familiar with what this means, basically right now our sieging system is based on a schedule. So if you capture a location, there's a schedule, and that schedule determines when the siege is going to happen. Like it's once a week or twice a week or whatever. Here's when the siege is going to happen, and you have no control over that. So what a handshake system does is kind of, there's two parts to it. One is the siege doesn't happen automatically. You have to actually have somebody come and plant a flag and say, I'm going to attack you, and the attack is going to happen tomorrow, and there's an investment required on that behalf. The other part of it is then you have some control over when that siege happens. So back in my Shadowbane days, the siege mechanic was somebody would come and plant the Bane Circle, and then you had that said it's going to happen tomorrow, but then the defender could adjust the time tomorrow within some gradient. They say, okay, well, then I'm going to decide, because I'm the defender, that it happens tomorrow at 6:00 p.m. So this is something that I would really like us to do. I may end up splitting it out into the two pieces separately and tackling them a little bit differently, especially if one of them is easier to get to than the other. They're kind of solving two different problems. The investment up front is so that I don't have to show up to potentially defend my keep every single time there's a siege window, not having any idea if I'm going to log in and get great PvP activity, or if I'm going to log in and it's going to be empty. That's the reason you have that upfront investment. The other one was just a convenience, which is, okay, well, you're going to tell me I have to show up tomorrow on Tuesday. Well, I get to pick when tomorrow. I get to pick. It's a bit of an advantage for the defenders. I get to decide when it's most appropriate for my team, because we're available to show up at 8:30 p.m. or whatever. So I've got ideas for both of those. I may end up teasing them apart, but that is on my hot list of things to look at as soon as possible. The next one on the list is Shadow Rule Set. Frankly, we already have the ability to do this. The reason that we haven't is we didn't want to prop yet another world, because every time we prop another world, that takes your player database and your peak concurrency, how many people are online at peak time, and it divides it by the number of places that they can go. I mean, if we could show that with assurance that we prop that rule set and we get more people now showing up than we got before, then it's worth doing. I haven't necessarily felt that way yet about the Shadow, so I've just been waiting, but it is something that's in our pocket that we can kind of do whenever we want. The next one under that is import restrictions, equipment only. This is just something I'd like to get in because we don't have it right now, as an ability to say, in addition to import tokens on a campaign, I can only bring in items that they're equipable. This is basically so that people can't bring in a bunch of gold and a bunch of building materials into a campaign, so that everybody starts on a more level playing field. And then the last one on my hit list is Collector's Edition and Backer Rewards. We've got the Collector's Edition that is about to go to print with all of the various pieces, which is super cool. And then we've got a laundry list of Backer Rewards that are in various states of almost being completed and delivered. So, like, for example, the castle is in, but it doesn't have any vendor and chest slots. So there's little bit odds and ends that we need to fix to get all that done for the short term. So there you go. I apologize, by the way. This is just going to be a lot of me talking because that's the way the roadmap part works. So anyway, so that's kind of it for my short-term list. I did put a note in the upper right-hand corner that said not an exhaustive list because, like I said, there's a ton of other stuff that we have on our list. It's a mountain of work. It's just not currently something that I'm thinking about on a daily basis. So
yeah, I mean, we fixed thousands of bugs in a milestone and lots of little things. And for example, one of the greatest quality of life things we added was the little loot widget that pops up whenever you loot something in 6400. It wasn't on anybody's list. It just kind of slipped under the radar. There's lots of little things like that.
Yeah, there's tons of little stuff like that that's happening kind of all the time. So, okay, so you want to move on to the medium-term list? All right, medium-term list. So skin system. So the skin system is something that I definitely want us to have, and we do have some skins that we owe people as backer rewards. We've tried to kind of since we don't have the system in yet, we've tried to kind of hardwire around that, like with mount transmogrifications. That basically says, take this mount and make it look like this mount through the crafting system. That was a kind of poor man's version of the skin system. Unfortunately, that won't work with anything. It works with mounts because mounts are really not unique in terms of stats. They're the only difference between this Swift mount and this Swift mount is cosmetics. So we were able to rig up a recipe for each of those to do that. We can't do that with things that have stats. So eventually we need to have skins. And this is everything from mount skins and pet skins to item skins to effect skins to player skins, right? We actually have a whole bunch of really cool, interesting war tribe creatures now, like Iroquois and Urgu and satyrs, that would be fantastic to offer as player skins. We just don't actually have a system yet that allows us to do it. So there's both the cosmetic piece of make me look like this, but there's also the UI piece of I need to be able to go in and see which ones I've unlocked on my account and select the different ones. It's something that I would really like us to have. In fact, actually, from a business standpoint, it's a big one because it's something that can actually give us revenue, which we're going to need once we launch. But it unfortunately is just not core gameplay. And so it's secondary to the other stuff that is on the list. Stealth and tracking is another one, man. I've got a bunch of ideas of things I want to do for stealth that could be really cool. But unfortunately, we just don't have the runway to get it done. So I put it on my list of things that I want as soon as we can actually afford the time and attention to get over to it. Universal PvP Leaderboard is another one. This ties actually into the tournament stuff that we're going to talk about later, but it's bigger than that because it also ties into campaigns. And so for that reason, it's not made it onto my short-term list just because we don't have time. It is definitely on my mid-term list, which is, like I said, sometime in that 6 to 12 months after launch. And that may mean that one of these comes 2 months after launch, right? I'm not saying that they're all going to come a year later. I'm just saying that that's kind of the window. Caravan Revamps. This is one that we've been talking about internally, which is our pig system is... It technically works, but I don't love it. It doesn't feel great to use. So we've got some ideas of things we might want to do to rework caravans. So I put that on the list here. We'll continue talking about it. Happy to have your feedback and see where that lands. I still really like the idea of caravans. I just feel like the one that we have in right now, while functional, it's not as fun as I would like it to be. I've got a handful of campaign things I'd like to do. Free building and dregs. Right now we have dedicated slots where it's like, well, this is where your Class A building can go. In the EK, we actually let you do deed placement. I would like to open that system up to get free building and dregs. It's something I've always wanted, always intended to get. too, but it's very, very complicated. Technically, it's a very, very big ask. So that's why we decided that it was something we were not going to be able to get done by launch. But I want it as soon as we can after that. In general, I want to take a look at the overall building loop in the dregs. We don't have a great mechanism for drains on that. So we need to look at building decay. That siege weapons, to me, fall into the same category as caravans, where they technically work, but they don't feel great. So I would like to take another look at that. And then lastly is partial interactions. So that we've had a lot of questions about things like, how come you don't give me the ability to do territory control, where in order to take this thing, I first have to take this thing and I can basically grow my kingdom. I would love to do that. It requires a level of technical interaction that we don't have right now, which is locations in the game talking to each other. If we can put in an interaction system to allow them to do that, that opens us up to be able to look at features like that. So it's another thing I'd like to look at as soon as we can after launch. And then a whole bunch of stuff around items and vendors. And that includes everything from bags to proccing items. Proccing items are basically, weapons that either grant you a power or occasionally will trigger a power, which would be pretty cool. I think that would be a really great add for crafting. Being able to put in buy orders on my vendor in the EK, that would be great. Saying, hey, I'm interested in buying this, and people can come sell stuff to me when I'm offline. Overriding the currency on vendors would be great. We don't have that right now. Vendors all use gold. It would be really nice to be able to have a vendor that sells stuff for dust, or a vendor that sells stuff for whatever the currency. And extending that to the players would be cool as well, to the player vendors also. And then lastly, the vassal tax system. We have right now a maintenance that happens on basically a system tax that happens on your system vendors, or on your EK vendors, your kingdom vendors. We don't have any kind of system where I can actually go and say, Ray, you can drop, or Blair, you can drop a vendor in my parcel in my kingdom, but everything you sell, I'm going to take 10% off the top. We don't have that. I think that would be really cool. So anyway, so that's kind of on my vendor and item list for midterm. So, all right, what else you got for us, Emily?
Looks like another midterm list should be up.
It should be, yep. All right, so race and class expansions. Handful of things I'd like us to get over to in race and classes. Crossover weapon specialization. This is basically, I've never liked the fact that our classes are locked into a particular weapon style. The challenge is it is a tremendous amount of animation, and we have to go through and touch every power in the game to say, okay, well, I want to use this power, but I don't have a two-handed sword. How will this power work if I'm dual wielding? How will this weapon work if I'm using a wide grip two-handed weapon? So it's more important for the tank classes and then for damage dealers, and lastly for support, but it is important, and I would like to get to it. It's just what Blair calls the work, right? There's not a lot of sexiness to it. It's a great output when it's done. When you actually have it and it works, it seems seamless and it feels great. It's a multiplier on the amount of animations that you need. So it's purely a cost consideration. It's something Blair can tell you I've wanted now since the beginning of the project, but it's always been out of reach. So
yeah, for years you've wanted it.
I've always wanted it. It's always bugged me about our game. And it actually is a holdover from the fact that originally our game used archetypes like a MOBA, and we made a decision to do the race class split, right? Where now I get to choose my race, I get to choose my class. I can't only play a Minotaur barbarian. So I think that would be really good, is adding that. I also, in general, feel like we need more equipment variety. Things like being able to dye and color my equipment would be great. Having items that I can only get because I have a particular discipline. Shadowbane had that, right? There was a blade weaver, I believe it was, that opened up the ability to use elven long blades. Having a witch hunter hat that I can only wear if I'm a witch hunter. Stuff like that would be really cool. We just haven't had time to do it. We have I can also, on my team, people know that I have a basic OCD issue with things not being symmetrical. And we have still 11 classes and 12 races. And God, that bugs me. It bugs me so much. So at some point, as soon as we can get to it, we know what that 12th class is going to be. I think we probably have talked about it in the past. I would like to get that in, but it's not something that we're going to get to immediately. And in spite of the fact that it bugs me, it's not even as high priority as some of the stuff that's on the short-term list. And then lastly, just expanding the list of available races and classes, right? And I do like to have combinations that, I don't want every race to have every class necessarily. I like that things are, there's a little bit more thought involved in it. But I think that we could expand on the list. And that's, again, it comes back to primarily animation support to be able to do that. So the next one I've got on the list is disciplines, expanding the disciplines and increasing the variability. I don't know if you can, Emily, if you can show Ray at all, but he's got some thoughts on this of stuff that they would like to do. So I thought it'd be good for him to kind of talk about the ideas, even though we're not going to get to them immediately. It's a system-wise, it's a foundation for us to be able to build a whole lot of really interesting stuff over time. Is there a way to bring Ray up, Emily? Maybe, maybe not.
I can just talk over if you want.
That'll be fine. Well, I mean, you can drop the slide for a second and go to the the Brady Bunch.
Yeah, there we are. All right, so yeah, I've always said that we wanted to expand the domains, right? The domains served, a lot of purposes when we first did them. But what it also did is it set a foundation for us to be able to expand sort of these subclasses, if you will. And so we've been going through and planning, taking a lot of people's suggestions. Like I said, I read all that stuff, make all these notes and write it down. We see areas that we can experiment in, like, there's some stamina stuff that, people may want to play in. We've got, damage conversions. There's all these things that we're playing around with and trying to come up with cool design ideas, new combinations, and really just sort of flesh out these domains. Everyone's like, hey, we'd like more in this domain or more in this domain. And we can do little things here and there about moving a disc around in the meantime. But in the background, we're planning a very large expansion of the discs that are available in each domain, because that's where you should really be able to get creative. And I know they feel a little tight. There's still choices, there's still things that they're good, and you might do this or you might do that, and that's great. That to me was the bare minimum of where we needed to be. But as I've said before, and we've talked about before, we really want to expand that stuff. And so there's a lot of plans on, like, oh, this was a cool idea, we just didn't have time to do it, or oh, we need tech support to make this work and we don't have time for that right now. So, but we're planning, and we're sort of, getting excited about the possibilities of what we can do. So that's what's coming.
Cool. All right. So going back to the list then, thank you, Ray. So the other thing that I'd like to say for disciplines is something that I would love to do. It's just expensive, right? Is I'd love to also expand the variability of disciplines, right? I mean, it's one thing to go through and say, all right, let's create another discipline that's going to hand you, it's going to give you another dot and another buff another passive that gives you personal health modifier or whatever. I think it's more interesting to have some that are more varied in what they can do, right? Stuff like, hey, this is a werewolf. It gives me a shape-shifting ability, and I can shape-shift into a creature that now has natural attacks and a different power tray, right? Weapon styles that unlock new and different animation sets for weapons. Racial disciplines would be really cool. I mentioned the Elven Blade Weaver earlier. You can only get to it if you come at it from this particular direction racially, which I think would be kind of interesting. I think there's a lot that we could do in that area. And, things like being able to summon characters. And we had a whole host of really interesting, weird, very bizarre disciplines back on my first game. And so I'd really like to do more of that. It's just that, generally speaking, that stuff is all expensive because it's one of. So that's why we didn't have it in our first set to the degree that I would like. And I think it's an area that we could definitely grow into. The next one is rule sets. So this is one that we're still discussing, which is perpetual guild versus guild. I think that there might be a hole in our general world lineup right now that you guys are seeing currently, right? On the current build, there's not a dregs running. And so the challenge with that is that means that there's a hard cap on how far players can currently get in their personal progression, right? In terms of level, in terms of being able to harvest, which trickles down into being able to craft, in terms of vessels. There's just, you kind of hit a spot where until the next dregs comes up, you can be stuck. And I don't really like that. I would prefer us to have one. So I'm kind of imagining that just like we need the Shadow, which is a time-limited 3-faction, we might want to have a perpetual guild versus guild that is basically one step in between the two in terms of risk and reward. So it's a guild versus guild world that does not go away. It doesn't offer the same level of rewards as a dregs, but it's not quite as dangerous as a dregs either because the stakes are not quite as high. I can see a reason for that, but just like the Shadow, and I think we could do it now. With the Shadow, we've actually tried it. With the Perpetual, we haven't. I think that the knobs would allow us to do it now. Again, I haven't done it because I didn't want to add yet another divisor on the number of players that are in the game right now, because in a PvP game, the other players are the content. So if you don't have other players around, you don't have any content. There's also guild alliance caps. There's some rules related to guilds and alliances that I would like to look at. I could imagine doing some campaigns where we set a max on the number of players on a team. It's hard to do that when you aren't running a ton of campaigns, because that basically is telling some people in a larger guild, hey, you can't come play here, or you can't play with your friends, and that really sucks. But once we have some mass and we actually have multiple campaigns running, I think this would be pretty cool to do. And there's a bunch of experimental rules that we technically could do. We just don't have the capacity, and we haven't had the time. We talked about a long time ago doing a campaign where it's you basically have every time you die, you're out for the rest of the day. Like, you can't come back until the next day. That would be interesting. It'd be fun to try, right? It might be cool. It might suck. Playing with the looting rules, playing with group size, which we can do now, playing with friendly fire. I would like to do all of that. Like, we have built effectively a great experimental engine for creating new matches and worlds, and we haven't really now gotten to experiment with it. So we're finally at the point where I'm excited to be able to do that. That's more victory cards as well, right? We've got this ability to do victory cards and put them in to really change the flow of the game. Where they are now, they're almost more like group questing or guild quests. So I think we could really expand in that area a lot. It's a huge area for expansion. It's just something that we've kind of hit. I think we've kind of scratched the surface on what we can do.
Yeah,
the last one. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the victory cards one, because I think we shifted. Like, originally, if you remember, victory cards, they kind of encompassed all of the activities we had in Crowfall, and then we got some feedback that there were activities that people didn't want to do, so we cut those activities, like going out and harvesting a bazillion things or whatever. And then, as part of 6400, which players haven't seen yet, in that dregs, the victory is now determined by campaign points and much less the victory cards.
Right,
victory cards are much more now about, we want to win as many victory cards as we can for activities we enjoy that give us rewards that are skewed towards that activity. So that means that we can start bringing back some of those other ones, because the overall winner of the campaign is determined by more of the conquest side of the house.
And that's the main thing that was really attractive to me about doing that, is it kind of loosened our ability to do more and varied victory cards, because at the end of the day, if you're not into one, you just don't do it. And it doesn't mean by doing it that you're folding your hand and saying, well, then I guess we won't win this campaign. Instead, now it's, hey, I get to choose whether or not I want to do this activity, and I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and the rewards will get, Raymond and I have been brainstorming and coming up with newer rewards that fit each of the categories. And you see some of that, I think, from the 6300 rewards, where we put in a bunch of custom harvesting tools in there that are really only useful for people who enjoy harvesting. So we'll try and get more of those out for more of the categories that reinforce that playstyle. So that is all coming, and that's content that the design team will build over time.
Yep. And then the last one on this list is UI customization. So this is one that I honestly would love to have had on the short-term list. It's just not possible, right? I mean, ultimately, it's going to be a huge amount of work to rewrite the underlying UI system to allow the kind of flexibility that we want to have. Like eventually, I would like players to be able to even do skins of the UI and actually expose it to the degree that other games have done. Usually other games don't have this at launch either, so it's not like we're alone in this one. But I do recognize that it's something that is a huge quality of life feature, so I would definitely like to get it. So I did put it on the list to look at as soon as we kind of have time to come up for air. So the longer term list, which I think the next slide jumps over to longer term, I'm not going to spend as much time going through that on a point by point basis because these are still very much in the ideation phase. This is more of I don't have a plan for it. I have a general thought that this is a cool area for us to go and explore. Things like a different additional biomes. We originally pictured our universe as being very much like Flash Gordon, right? The little floating islands, and they might be, and it's a bowl of Skittles is actually what we talked about, right? Is you spill out a bowl of Skittles and you've got red ones and green ones and yellow ones and orange ones. So you go to a world and it's a swamp world. You go to a jungle world. You go to a forest world. You go to a Feywood world. So I would like us to get to that. We kind of decided early on to put all of our concentration on one to get the core game working, but doing additional biomes and then adding architecture sets to that as well will make the universe really feel alive. So in the long term, it's definitely an area to get to. Another feature that we talked about early on and just never got to was animal and creature taming. And animal husbandry. I still think those would be cool. They're clearly not critical for us, so they are on the list. They didn't get dumped. We haven't really gotten around to thinking about it. I would put farming. It's not on the list, but I'd put kind of farming as the same. I'd put it at the same level of. There's some interesting thoughts and gameplay that could come out of it, but it's not super pressing. New campaign types is just basically a nod to the fact that we intend to continue experimenting forever. And then lastly, I think there's a lot of stuff we can do with the gods, right? So we've started to do that some now with victory cards, and sacrifice, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we could do in terms of having the gods summon incarnations on the world, or having the gods do large-scale god-style events that players can influence. I've got a bunch of really cool ideas there. Relics would be really cool too. I think it'd be cooler if the relics actually were more of an active role in the universe. I think actually this is something that Darkfall 2 did really well, where you would find a relic and your guy would actually have to carry it. It's above your head, or you're actually clearly walking around the world carrying it, and other people can kill you. You install it in your keep and you get a benefit, but other people can sneak in and take it. So I think that would be a really cool system for us to explore, but it's on my longer term. It's not on my short term list. And then we've also got this divine favor system already set up, really for guilds. It would be interesting to explore potentially making more personal rewards. That could be daily, it could be weekly. I don't want it to feel like a task. I just want to have it be something that answers the question of, hey, I just logged in. I don't have a lot of time. What can I do that isn't necessarily a strategic level thing for my whole team, but feels meaningful for me? So anyway, that's some of the stuff that we're thinking about longer term. There may be another long-term slide behind this one, actually. I can't recall. Yeah, there is. Oh, yeah, the EK slide. So there's a whole bunch of stuff we'd like to do for EKs, and this, I put it on a separate long-term slide because it will play out over the long term, but that doesn't mean we're just going to pause and wait on all of it. It just means it'll trickle in kind of over time. We have some dedicated sort of resources just working on EKs, and so as they get stuff done, you'll see it coming online. I'd love to give monarchs the ability to set their import-export rules. I think that would be really cool. The tax system I mentioned earlier was a sales tax system. I think it would also be great to have a tax system on parcels and buildings, just a big general like property tax system. Breeding and farming is on this list. Adventure parcels would be cool. I'd love to be able to install a spider canyon in my EK so that people could come there and actually go and kill spiders. That would be pretty cool. The building system needs a pass, just like siege weapons, in my opinion. Like, it's in and it's functional, but man, I think it could definitely use a UI pass. Kingdom management is really clunky right now because it uses slash commands. So there's a host of UIs I'd like to see to add to that. Visibility visibility has to do with how do I let other people know to come to my EK because we're planning on doing, I'm sorry, I got distracted by texting. Stop texting in the background. So What was I talking about? Visibility. Okay, so visibility is about me and my EK, and how do I let other people know from the lobby to come visit mine. So we don't have a good way for doing that right now. We've got pretty rudimentary sorting and filtering. So we need to come up with a system that does a better job of letting people actively bring their kingdom to the knowledge of other players. Once we have architects and biomes, I'd love to support that in the EK2. I'd like to be able to have a desert world. Like, that would be really cool. Kingdom portals is the ability for me to tie my kingdom to other people's kingdoms. So if I have a kingdom and Blair has a kingdom, we can set up a portal, and it's basically a rune gate to connect our kingdoms. That would be really cool. And once we have that, of course, I'm going to now want the ability to go to war with Blair's kingdom, where I set up that portal or rune gate, and we both agree that it's going to be open for the next month or week or whatever. And during that time, it's full PvP and full destruction. Like, that would be really, really cool, but it's definitely a longer term thing. We didn't build a lot of those strategy level pieces and PvP pieces in the EK, so we'd have to bring that over. And frankly, it'd have to be changed quite a bit to make it work. But I do think it would be really cool. So I think that's it. I think that's actually the roadmap list. Like I said, there's a whole bunch of stuff that it was not exhaustive. This was me going through all my notes and pulling it together. I'm sure there's stuff I've forgotten or stuff that just didn't quite make the cut, because while it's impactful, it's not as impactful as the stuff on the list, or I might have just forgotten it. That's possible.
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking about some of this stuff for years, Todd. I mean,
For sure.
You really pulled out some of the stuff here from early days, like linking kingdoms and things like that.
For sure, definitely on the long term.
And remember, when we talk about short term, midterm, and long term, the short term is pre-launch and immediately around our launch window, right?
Yep.
Which is rapidly approaching, which is why we bucketed these things. Midterm is further out, and long term is much further out.
Right.
These are things that we've not forgotten about, things that we want to get to, and I think it's a great list.
So I will say that the medium term is important, though, because usually the pattern that we've seen is MMOs don't really come into their own at launch. That's just kind of the general model, right? Is MMOs spend the first year getting their legs underneath them, getting enough of a player community, listening to that player community, and that will start to focus the next round of things that you make. I mean, my last MMO that I worked on didn't really become huge until a year after launch, right? The first year was relatively quiet, and then a year in, we crossed the 1 million registered players line, and then from there, it just really took off. But that's the model that we've seen, especially with PvP games, right? Albion was kind of small at the beginning, and it picked up steam. Eve was relatively small at the beginning and picked up steam. So that's kind of the same model that I expect. So that medium-term list is actually pretty critical, because that's, to me, is once we've got a baseline, now we start to actually put in some pieces that we've always wanted and we just never really had the time to get to. And I think that's where we start it starts to get even more exciting. So I'm excited. I'm excited to put the list together, frankly. Like I said, I've been thinking about what's right in front of us for so long that going back and looking through my old notes and being like, oh yeah, I still do really want to do that. That's cool. It's exciting. It's actually fun. It's nice to look up and see the horizon again.